Hey, what's up, YouTube fans? So, the topic for this video, right, is the evolutionary origin of arms and hands, right, and the ancestors of all primates, right? So I'm not gonna go into like specifically, specific groups like us in particular. That would be topics for other videos. And that would be a matter of like once our ancestors already had arms and hands, but just as they adapted over time, gradually improving and specializing that already existing structure of the arm and hand, right, towards various purposes, like in our lineage, moving bipedally, climbing in trees less, tool use, things like that, right? And well, also it is worth noting that in the ancestors of all apes, including us, they evolved a dorsally positioned scapula, allowing for highly mobile shoulders, right? And so that applies to all apes, including us, whereas most other primates, right, like the old world monkeys, it is not like that, right? And so, or at least most other anthropoids, I think there might be more examples in the steppes or hinds, right? But in any event, a lot of primates have a less dorsally positioned scapula, not as mobile shoulders, but they still are capable of climbing just fine. They still have fully functional arms and hands, right? But how do you not just like improve the structure of the arm and hand, right, but get arms and hands to begin with from creatures that did not have arms and hands, right? That could at first glance seem like that it's like a very fundamentally different, right? That you're not just like improving upon something that was already there, but getting something totally new that wasn't in there. But interestingly, it actually isn't so much fundamentally distinct, right? Because the origin of the arms and hands can happen from modifying, specializing something that already was there to begin with, the front legs and feet, right? Because you see, all tetrapods that still have their limbs, some tetrapods have lost their limbs, like snakes, right? Which in the case of, why would they lose it? Well, different groups, as they adapt to different environments, they find different ways of doing things. As they specialize over time, right? Snakes, they don't have legs and feet, but they're very proficient in doing things the way they do them. They still can get around, right? Very well, right? But in any event, that's a topic for another time, right? But in any event, all tetrapods that still have their limbs, even if they don't have arms and hands, they still have limbs with the same fundamental structure as our arms and hands, right? A dog, for example, it does not have arms and hands, right? And yet their front limbs, even though they're functionally different enough that in our language we give it a different name, we don't call it arms and hands, right? It shares very much, interchangeable fundamental structure, right? The shoulder bone, the scapula, right? Humerus, radius, ulna, carpals, metacarpals, and digits with phalanges, it's all there, right? So the same fundamental skeletal structure as in our arms and hands are in a dog's front legs and feet, right? And so even though in our language we give them names because they're functionally different, and superficially, because of how they're functionally used very differently, they could appear fundamentally different. but on a fundamental level, they're actually very much interchangeable structures, right? Sharing all of these same skeletal parts, the same skeletal pattern, right? And it is also the same fundamental structure as the the wings of bats and birds, right? And the extinct pterosaurs, which in their own lineage they evolved flight. That's a topic for another time. I could do videos on. I have done videos on it. It's been a while. But in any event, the front legs and feet of a dog, as I said, is the same fundamental structure as legs and feet. And so it, much like how going from the arms and hands of our last common ancestor with the chimpanzees, going from the arms and hands of the earliest primates to ours, isn't for the most part evolving a totally fundamentally new appendage. Is more so modifying something that was already in there. Likewise, it's actually very much the same with the origin of arms and hands to begin with. It's a matter of modifying something that was already in there, the front legs and feet, right? As our ancestors specialized towards tree climbing, right? They adapted towards tree climbing. And what you'll want to also further note, right, is that there are creatures with no arms and hands, 4 legs and feet that can tree climb, right? So for our ancestors to have gotten started tree climbing, they did not need to start off having arms and hands in order to start off tree climbing. There are plenty of examples of creatures that have 4 legs and feet, no arms and hands, and yet they still can tree climb. Cats are a good example. Even the large cats can tree climb, right? Like lion, tiger, they can climb high into the treetops. They do commonly, and they even sometimes carry very large prey up into the treetops, right? And so a creature does not need to have arms and hands to begin with to get started tree climbing. So this is part of what shows the reducibility of it. You don't need to already have arms and hands for them to have gotten started tree climbing. When they had 4 legs and feet, they can start tree climbing when they already have 4 legs and feet. They don't actually need to have arms and hands in order to begin tree climbing, right? And so then it's a matter of just a creature that already uses its front legs and feet to tree climb. As they adapt over time, their limbs are more and more specialized towards doing that, right? Their legs and feet are more and more specialized towards doing that, both the front and the back, because you have to remember most primates have grasping feet, right? So all of their limbs are specialized towards life in the trees. In the case of us, our lineage went on to adapt to bipedalism, right? And so we lost some of the features that help with tree climbing, right? Like grasping feet. But our feet is a more derived setup, right? Most primates, right, have grasping feet, right? And so all of their limbs are adapted towards tree climbing, right? And so what it's a matter of then is much like how with the, going from early primate arms and hands to our arms and hands, it's mostly not evolving anything fundamentally new. It's mostly improving upon something that was already in there, right? The arms and hands, right, improving on them, specializing them towards certain purposes. Likewise with the origin of arms and hands to begin with, right, even though it's functionally different enough from arms and hands that we give it a different name in our language, right, there are, the creatures with 4 legs and feet, their front legs and feet share very much interchangeable skeletal structure with our arms and hands. And even some of them very similar function to what a primate uses it for, even though, in the case of a lion, they have 4 legs and feet, they don't have arms and hands, right? But they still can be functionally used in that way, climbing, right? And so you don't actually need arms and hands for the function to get started. Legs and feet can be used for climbing, right? And so it's just a matter of modifying them, gradually specializing towards that, right? Obviously, since creatures with 4 legs and feet, some of them can tree climb, right? That therefore means that there's a gradient, right? It's not like black and white that like, oh, it has to be to the level that we would consider it arms and hands for it to be able to tree climb at all. There's a gradient of how good you can be at tree climbing. And there are very obvious, if you think about it, very obvious evolutionary advantages that a species could get from spending more time in the trees, adapting to life in the trees, right? Such as, for one thing, it could help with avoiding predators on the ground, right? If the predator is itself not able to climb trees and or not as good at climbing trees, right? Then climbing trees will be a useful way of escaping them, right? You have a predator chasing you that is itself not as good at tree climbing, and there's a tree nearby. Climbing up the tree will be a very convenient way to escape the predator, right? Also, another advantage that can come is accessing food up in the trees, right? Like fruits, right? All animals ingest organic material. All animals need to ingest organic material to survive. Even the simplest animals that have no organs, right? The sponges and protozoans, even they, as animals, they need to ingest organic materials, right? That is one of the characteristics that distinguish animals from other groups of living things. It is one of the characteristics that shows that we are animals, right? Because we eat, right? We eat food, right? Whereas a plant acquires nutrients through different means, right? So that's part of why we are animals, right? But so in any event, a chimp, a dog, an animal, they need to find food to survive, right? Some environments there will be shortages of food, right, which can in some cases lead towards like large large amounts of a species dying off very quickly if they're like the food that they eat is not so much around for whatever reason, like the things that they ate went extinct or whatever reasons, right? But so in any event, a very convenient way of accessing more food to eat, right? Since there's fruits up in the trees, if you were to climb up in the trees, a very convenient way of accessing more fruit, right? And obviously, the more that your species is tree climbing, the more it'll be useful to be better at tree climbing, right? So you're less likely to, for example, fall out of the tree and break a leg, die maybe, right? It's really just a matter of creatures that had 4 legs and feet and already were tree climbing. As they specialized towards that, as they adapted over time, gradually what was their front legs and feet became modified into arms and hands, right? And it can happen so gradually that there's not really any specific point along the way that it's like, oh, like this offspring, it like has like this whole new appendage that his parents don't have, and so like, oh, my parents, or I mean like I have this whole new body part and my parents don't. It doesn't actually have to be like that. It can happen so gradually in the transition from legs and feet to arms and hands that any point along the way is mostly the same as the parents, more or less, right? More or less the same. Just gradually the front legs and feet and all of the legs, not just the front legs and feet, but all of the legs being more and more specialized towards tree climbing, right? And so what also, this is a good example for showing, it's a good example for like a common criticism that people will make when they're trying to show that evolutionary theory is flawed, is that they will say that evolution is good at like evolutionary processes like natural selection are good at explaining like the improvement of already existing structures, but not good at explaining the origin of new structures. But see, what people are saying that will oftentimes be oblivious to is just how much structures that we, like the origin of a new structure, can be through means of modifying something that was already in there, right? Because so much of the structures that are functionally different between different groups that we would give them different names, when you look at their fundamental structure, is very much interchangeable parts, right? And so, and this all the more becomes the case when we look at embryonic development, right? Structures that, when it's an adult comparing the structures, you wouldn't see a connection. But during embryonic development, we see that much of the same embryonic structures that develop into something totally different in another group, we still have it, even though it develops into something different than us, we still have the same embryonic structure, right? Showing that on a fundamental level, right, it's, much interchangeable, right? The same embryonic structure, that means much of the same genetic instructions, right? And so people that will say something like that, they're like, oh, evolution is good at explaining the improvement of already existing structures, but not good at explaining the origin of new structures. They often are oblivious to just how much the origin of a new structure can be from modifying an already existing structure, right? And so it isn't actually like fundamentally distinct, like the origin of a new structure versus the improvement of already existing structures. All too often, the origin of a new structure is through improvement of already existing structures, right? As as they adapt over time, right? And so, yeah. All right, that's all for now. See you guys.